The Cold War was a competition between the Soviet Union and the United States in practically every area, and one of these competitions that came to be was space. The Soviet Union and the United States were racing to one-up each other in developing aerospace capabilities like artificial satellites, space probes, and human spaceflight. This race would last 12 years and would develop humans' capabilities in space at an exponential rate. The first half of the race would be full of wins for the Soviet Union, while the Americans would be behind. They got the first artificial satellite in space, Sputnik 1, with its sequel, Sputnik 2, carrying the first animal in the space about a month later, a dog named Laika. The US would eventually have their first artificial satellite and would create the National Aeronautics Space Association, or NASA, to have a dedicated group for advancing in space travel. That didn't slow the Soviet Union down though, as they kept staying on top throughout the early to mid 60s, from getting the first human in orbit, to getting the first woman in space, to having the first multi-person spacecraft, to even the first spacewalk. With each accomplishment, the Americans will be months behind before achieving those same things. It wasn't until the tail end of 1965 when the Americans would beat the Soviet Union in something, which was the first orbital rendezvous. It was back and forth from here on out, with both sides even having losses. The Soviet Union lost Sergei Korolev, their premier spacecraft designer, while the US lost 3 of their cosmonauts during the launch pad test. Despite those setbacks, both sides were accomplishing things left and right. The Soviet Union beat the US to having the first soft landing on the moon, having the first spaceflight fatality, which isn't anything to be proud of, but yeah, that happened, and the first spacecraft that flew around the moon and back to Earth, while the US beat the Soviet Union to having the first docking in space and the first crewed flight around the moon. During this time, the US would create the Apollo program, which was mainly created for missions involving the moon. The Apollo program would effectively end the space race, with the mission Apollo 11 succeeding in getting the first humans to land on the moon, just 2.5 weeks after the Soviet Union's failed attempts with the explosion of the N-1 moon rocket, which is still considered as the largest rocket explosion in history. The space race can be connected to many points in history, and here are 2 examples. Its connection to the Cold War are clear, given that it's a byproduct of that war. A recurring theme of the Cold War is competition. The creation of Sputnik 1, alongside fueling the space race itself, also fueled the arms race, since Sputnik 1's existence had both countries working on preparing new methods to attack the other, eventually escalating to an exploitation of the fear of a missile gap between the US and Soviet Union's nuclear arsenals during the 1960 US president election. Down the line, it led to the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, which stood as a reminder for both sides the dangers of the weapons they're developing. The space race can also be connected to Germany's position in World War II. For about the first half of the space race, the Soviet Union was dominating, constantly staying on top of its competitor, the US. Likewise, for the first half of World War II, Germany was undisputedly on top, with them being able to take over the entirety of Europe in just a few months and maintain power over the continent with an iron fist. For the next third of the space race, the US got even with the Soviet Union, and both sides were accomplishing stuff before the other could. During this next third of World War II, after Japan got the US to join thanks to Pearl Harbor, them teaming up with Great Britain provided a lot more competition for the Germans, and even though the US-Great Britain team struggled, they were pulling wins against them. By the end of the space race, the Soviet Union lost to the US after failing to get the first humans on the moon, and at the end of World War II, Germany ended up losing the war, being surpassed by the US-Great Britain team. Both events had one side dominating for the first half, followed by the other side getting even, and ending with that side surpassing the other. The space race allowed for so many technological feats with regards to space in such a short amount of time, and is one of the many examples of how competition between 2 opponents can breed so much growth in an area. Its existence ties in with the arms race and led to developments with missiles that would be used between the Soviet Union and the US, and the way the series of events evolved follows a similar path to how Germany was during World War II. The Cold War had many bad things come out of it, but the advancements in space technology were not one of them.